place a request with everybody in the group because sometimes I may forget. So everyone should give me, somebody should give me a heads up just to check that have you started the recording. Okay. So and what I will do is also that when I start the recording, I will announce it so that you know that okay, this has been started. Okay. So we want to make sure that the thing is captured so that whoever misses the class, or even if you want to revise, because I may not be able to write down everything. Okay. So, Neera, you can hear some voices from that side. It needs to be quiet. Okay. I don't know. I couldn't hear actually exactly what was being said, but anyway, it doesn't matter. So, so what you will find is that in this sessions that I will take, using the terminology that I discussed with you yesterday, this will be taken in a lecture tutorial method. Because when I'm trying to teach you certain concepts, if we can assume that the students are attentive, okay, then the lecture tutorial method is much more efficient in covering a large body of material. Rather than this, if I go around the room asking, okay, Kirit, what do you think? Bhavya, what do you think? That will take a long time to cover some basic material, okay? So I'm going to do this not by seminar style, the using the seminar style method, but lecture tutorial. So the risk here is that you might switch off. Okay, so therefore, please guard against that. You're mature adult students now. You have to understand your responsibility here is stay alert and be attentive and ask questions when you don't understand. Don't switch off, okay? That will lose because both of us are trying to achieve a common outcome. That is, the students must be able to master the concepts that I'm discussing with them, okay? So you have to also play your part. All right. The first, we'll be going through certain topics which I want to introduce to you, certain concepts. So this is first term, which is jurisprudence, okay? And so there's some noise coming from Neeraj's from that room, okay? So the people who are in that room, I don't know who the source of the noise is, but you guys have to be a little careful not to have, because we have not muted you, so that you can ask questions, but you have to be a little careful not to disturb the class, okay? Unless you actually have a question. So you just need to be a little watchful with your noise levels. Okay. So here I've used it two ways. I said this in the previous class a little bit. I think it's better to I'll just take away this statement for now, okay? I'll just let's just write now, because I think the second way using is basically we can say it, okay? We can keep this, okay? So this is a term that I want you to know about, jurisprudence, okay? So this is the main way we use this term is, the main sense in which we use the term, okay, is that we use it to refer to the entire body of laws, okay? The body of laws, as you will understand, consists of three types of, these are what we call the sources of law, okay? So I'll use this term here. These are normally referred to as, this is a term that we need to know. It's a legal term, okay? Sources of law. Well, this is actually not really a source of law. First two are the main, okay? Especially the first two, okay? All right, that is acts and judgments. All right, the text also sometimes, but not really. We mainly mean the acts and the judgments. So when we talk about body of laws, what we are talking about is the acts, that is all the legislation that is there on the subject, the judgments, okay, which are the court judgments, and then so High Court, Supreme Court, maybe sometimes even lower courts. Then the text as in textbooks, okay, important textbooks. So if you're talking about if I use a term like, so how do we use this term? If we are using a term like, if I say the jurisprudence on Indian contract law, okay, if I say jurisprudence on Indian contract law, what do I mean? I mean basically the Indian Contract Act, the Indian Specific Relief Act, which is connected to the Contract Act. And then I mean all the judgments that have come through, mainly Supreme Court, also High Court, on the Contract Act. And that has formed a part of the body of the law. As you will see down the line, that the Supreme Court judgments are actually a law of the land. So therefore, there's an article in our Constitution which mandates that. So this is also part of our body of law because of the system we follow. And then, of course, we also are referring to the text. And when we say jurisprudence, we are referring also to the text, which is texts like, say, Pollock and Mullah on the Indian Contract Act. So well-known authors who have written on the topic. So all that is referred to as, when we say the jurisprudence on the Indian Contract Act, it's referring to the entire body of laws. Okay, and basically on what is the current state, entire body of laws. Okay, and especially the current state of thereof. Okay, just the current state of those body of laws. Okay, that's one. And then, of course, we also use the word. This is less commonly used. Okay. Less commonly used, which is that we also use jurisprudence to refer to the study of this body of laws. Okay, study or science of the above. Okay, so the really, I think it's more important to say study of the above. Okay. All right. So the body of the study of this other, we also refer to that as the jurisprudence. And so this is less common use of the term. Mainly what it means is this. Okay, that's the first term. The second term I want to discuss with you, which I think is a very important term in business schools, in a business school context, which unfortunately is not discussed really anywhere. We have to also find a way to fit it into a course, but I'm right now fitting it just into lab because it's very important. Okay, what does taxonomy mean? So some of you might remember from your school biology classes when you classified all the animals and all the creatures in the animal kingdom. So all these mammals and reptiles and all that. So that's actually one example of a classification. Okay, this is actually that was a particular classification where you look at all the animals, like human beings are mammals, dogs are also mammals, but we are called Homo sapiens. But Homo sapiens does not include dogs. Okay. So that kind of classification. So that's a particular classification that's referred to as taxonomy. But taxonomy has a broader term. Okay, it's actually a broader term, which there's still some disturbance coming from somewhere. Okay, so taxonomy is a broader term, which can be talked about as in two ways once again, which is mainly the science of classification. So this can be the science of classification of broadly similar objects of any area. It is not restricted to biology. Okay, most people when they talk about taxonomy, they are talking about what they learn in school in biology, but that's not the only way in which the term can be used. That's only one use of the term. So taxonomy means the science of classification. There's two meanings essentially. It's a science of classification. So what are the principles that you would follow when it comes to classification, doing a classification of broadly similar objects, okay, into various categories, okay? And it's also used, the second use of the word taxonomy is to denote a particular classification. All right. So for instance, here I have one particular classification. If we have, so one is the science of classification. You'll learn more about this when we talk about the principles of taxonomy. And the second use of the word is it also used to refer to a particular classification. So for instance, here we have, like, assume that in VIPs, we only teach these 5 courses. In that case, then one of the ways you can classify VIP students is you can classify them according to the subject they're studying. Okay, and you can do this. These are the categories. Okay, so all VIP students, you can classify them like this, and then we would say that this is a taxonomy of VIP students. Okay, now there could be other kinds of taxonomy. You could divide them into male and female. You could say those without glasses, those wearing glasses. All kinds of classifications are possible. So it depends on what the classification that you do is really a function of what is your objective. Usually you are doing this because there is some kind of study that you're doing, some kind of analysis that you're doing. And so the objectives of that analysis are going to determine what kind of classification you do. All right. So the other way we use the term is a taxonomy of VIP students. It's a particular taxonomy, a classification can also be referred to as a taxonomy. Okay. So why am I? Yes, Sushant?
Sir, just wanted to clarify, when we are saying taxonomy of VIP students, so are we using it as an umbrella term to classify all the students, whether it's a BB, LLB, or a PGDM? So are we using it as an umbrella term, or we are saying that BBLLB is one taxonomy and PGDM is another? So am I audible to you?
To mute the Neeraj's class. There's a lot of noise coming from that class. Okay, you guys have to be a little disciplined because Shashank has asked a question. If you have a question, I'll answer your question. But let me first answer Shashank's question. Okay, so the way I meant to use the term taxonomy is here in this case is that the this entire classification, okay, it's not just the BBA this is going to be called a taxa, okay, that is one category. So what I've done here is I have taken, as I said, we assume that WIPS does not teach any other course, okay, in this for the sake of this example, and so therefore this entire classification that I have done, okay, which is I have put all the students into according to their stream, and so this whole thing is referred to as a taxa. That's why I put the inverted commas here. So this whole thing is referred to as a taxonomy of WIP students. So any classification that you do, so if you do a classification where you classify all the students into male and female, or undergraduate specialization, if you do those who came from economics, those who came from back BCom, and so on and so forth, that also you can do. So if you do any of those, each of those is a taxonomy of WIP students. So this is the population that you are classifying, and each classification scheme, this is a scheme of classification which is based on what stream they're studying, okay. You can also do those who are below 6 feet tall, or those who are above 6 feet tall. That also is a classification. Everything, many classifications, and each of them will be called a taxonomy of WIP students. This classification scheme will be called a taxonomy of WIP students. Does this make sense? Is it clearer now, Sushant?
So collectively we say it a taxonomy, like to the total sample of population.
Correct. To the scheme, not just some of the sample, but you have now given us more information than just the samples. The sample was only WIP students. Now you have given us more information because you have given us richer detail by saying that, okay, this sample can be further subdivided into, by stream of study, can be further subdivided into 5 classes, okay, or categories or taxa, which is these 5. Okay, so you have given us more information. So we are not referring to the sample to population alone, but yes, the population, but in a richer way by referring to a particular taxonomy. So the taxonomy is referring to the whole classification scheme. Is this clear?
Okay, sir. Okay, got it, sir.
So this is a taxonomy. Now, if you do male, female, that will also be another taxonomy. Okay, if you do with glasses, without glasses, that is also another taxonomy. All of these will be a taxonomy. Okay, is this clear? Okay, so this is the one way of using the term. The same term is being used, but it's used in 2 different contexts. So you have to figure out the context, and then you'll know what sense it is being used. Now, the other sense in which you use the word taxonomy is actually to refer to the science of classification, okay? Kind of similar to jurisprudence, where the science or study of all this body of law, that is also called jurisprudence. And the body of laws is also called jurisprudence. So similarly here, in taxonomy, what we are saying is the first meaning of taxonomy, which is that the science of classification, which is basically the study of or the science of classification. When we do a classification, what rules should we follow? What principles should we follow? And you'll understand why when I talk about principles of good taxonomy here. Just now I'll talk about it. And so before that, I just want to cover. So this is the second way in which taxonomy is used, which is the science of classification or the study of classification. Now, before I come into the principles of good taxonomy, I'll just give you briefly why am I discussing this, because again, you'll find I'm pretty sure no other business school is going to discuss this topic. Now, why am I discussing this topic? So because you may compare notes and you may wonder why is this teacher discussing this. The reason I'm discussing it is because you are going to be you are preparing yourselves as business students, okay? And so one of the things we see in the world of business is that the problems that you see in the world of business, they will appear in a very unstructured form, okay? So problems, if we highlight the keywords, the problems, world of biz. So I'll be using some shortcuts like this, not going to be properly written English. So please don't, just in case please do not take my writing in these notes as a model of proper written communication, because I'll be using a lot of SMS text and all that. The objective of these notes is essentially to prevent, remove the need for the students to take notes, because pretty much everything that is discussed, I make sure I take a note here, and this is shared with the students, so the student can forget about taking notes and concentrate on absorbing what is being taught. Okay, so here we will have some shorthand and all. So please do not write a letter to the Prime Minister using this kind of structure. Okay, so please remember, when you have to be much more formal when you're writing actual business. So usually, so the problems in the world of business that you see, they are very, very unstructured. Okay, very unstructured form. Okay. In the sense that what I mean by unstructured is that in QT, subjects like QT, you would have had some problems where the teacher might have given you some problem where you have an equation and you have to solve that equation. Now, that's a very structured problem, because you know what has to be done. Okay, but in the world of business, you don't have the problem so clearly defined. So sometimes you have to figure out what the actual problem is. Okay. So therefore, in that situation, it's always good. Basically, what taxonomy does for you is, if you are able to do a good taxonomy, it will help you to reduce the complexity of the situation. Okay, so that's basically why. And so therefore, if you have some practice with doing taxonomy, okay, and doing taxonomies, then you want, or practice with taxonomy. Then what happens is, when you eventually get out into the real world, you have some kind of preparation for situations like this, where you will have an unstructured problem and you will have to use some kind of taxonomy to reduce the complexity and deal with the problem, okay, in a more effective way. So I'll just explain what I mean by giving you a very simple example, okay, which is that I'll give you two examples actually, which is, first let me show you. So basically what happens is, otherwise what happens is this, the information is too much. There's too much information and you need some kind of a classification scheme. So I'll show you, like, I maintain a lot of my notes in Drive. Okay, and so I've got all this at the very high level. Okay, and so for instance, what I have done is, here there is a scheme of classification. So under DSP, there are various types of topics. Okay, this is not a model classification, because some of these things, like for instance, some of those topics, like like PhD, my PhD should be under academics, but since I'm working on the PhD now, it's an active study topic. So therefore, it has come here, okay, as a root level. So it should not normally be there, but so don't take this as a model. But I'm just showing you that this is a very, this is all the information that I have in my Drive. I have categorized it into various categories. Okay, so this is one, everything to do with DSP WIPs, okay, and so on and so forth. I'll come back to this. And then, of course, within that, you have other topics. So one is the academics related material. Then one is dealing with curriculum enhancements, okay, capstone projects, various types of projects. And then also DSB admin related stuff, consulting stuff is not mixed with academic stuff. So that kind of stuff. So all this material is a way of doing taxonomy. Okay, so I have done, that's one example. I'll come back to that when I discuss one point. Okay, so the point is, when you're doing this kind of a taxonomy, what are the principles that you should be careful about? Because a lot of people make mistakes, and even in some leading textbooks you see these mistakes. Okay, I'll show you another example of a taxonomy, which is, if I go here, I'll just bring it from here. Okay, so here what you have is actually a taxonomy of, I don't know, maybe you can't read too much of it because it's, I just wanted to give you a broad overview. You don't have to read the actual stuff. So this is actually a taxonomy of global financial markets. Okay. So here you can see in this broad taxonomy, because if you look at global financial markets one by one, you will get totally confused, because there are so many markets and so many types of instruments that your head will start spinning. So what I have done here is I have tried to evolve a classification scheme or taxonomy, where I have divided them into asset classes along the rows, and instruments along the columns, okay, and so on and so forth. No need to get too much into this at this stage, but it's just an example of what I've done as a taxonomy, okay. And what is the advantage of this? That if I see a product, okay, like I see, let's say, foreign exchange options. Okay, foreign exchange is referred to as FX options. So if I encounter any foreign exchange options, I can classify them in this box, which is at the intersection of options and currencies. Okay, so currency options. So it's not a commodity option, it's a currency option. So this is how I use a taxonomy. It's very useful because these kind of products, you'll see there are so many of them, they have become mind-boggling to deal with. Unless you have a taxonomy, it becomes very difficult to deal with it. And then I can further classify whether what kind of market it is in, etc. Okay, other classifications. So I just wanted to give you a flavor of that. Okay. So now here, coming back to the principles of taxonomy, okay, that there are 5 principles, okay, which we'll explain quickly. So first is it should be comprehensive. Okay, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is this one. Let's look at this. Okay, now if it is true that there is also a MA course offered by VIPS. If it is true that an MA course is also being offered by VIPS, now I did this taxonomy, and in this taxonomy, the MA does not appear. Okay, so this is failing the first rule of taxonomy, the first principle, which is that it should be comprehensive. Whatever scheme you come up with, that I must be able to capture all the elements of the population that Shashank was talking about, referring to the population, right? So now what will happen is if it is true that VIPS is also teaching MA and I have not put MA here, then somebody will ask a question. So where do I put the MA students? You got boxes for these guys, but where do I put the MA students? So it is not a comprehensive taxonomy if I do only this. There should then be a MA also category also in this taxonomy. Okay, so that's the first principle. That should be that the taxonomy should be comprehensive, in that it should cover all the elements in the population. Okay, nobody should be left out. The second principle is that the taxa should be mutually exclusive. Okay, which means you remember this term from your set theory classes in school. Okay, that mutually exclusive sets means that if A and B are mutually exclusive, then no element of A is an element of B, and vice versa. Okay, those are mutually exclusive sets, right? So here, if we do a classification, if it is true that, you know, that, so there is some background noise here. Okay, right. So mutually exclusive means that there should be no confusion. So if somebody is a BBA LLB student, we should be able to say confidently that therefore he can't be a BCA student. Now, as you know, the way it works in India in most cases is we don't allow students to enroll in multiple degree programs simultaneously. Generally, that is the case. Although in practice, people still violate that rule, but the rule is written that way. Okay. So in that case, we know that this rule is satisfied, because if this is a comprehensive taxonomy and the first principle is satisfied, then mutually assured, because we know that this is how it works in India, that we are not allowed to study 2 programs. So we can be confident that the guy who's studying MCA is definitely not in PGDM. So, yeah. Is there any question from the actual room, from the classroom? Because there's some noise coming from. Is there any problem or any question? Okay, so guys, please try, because I don't want to mute. Yes, sir. Yeah. Is there any question?
So plastic is used in products to make variety of products like plastic,
Actually,
but in business market, plastic, we have
actually, I'm not able.
Plastic to.
I'm not able to hear you very well. Actually, the acoustics is not good.
प्लास्टिक से यूज होना है और उसके बाद फिर उसको उससे बहुत सारे प्रोडक्ट बन जाते हैं तो जो मार्केट में बहुत सारे प्रोडक्ट्स हैं उसी चीज के और
प्लास्टिक let's not don't explain to each other, although in general in class we could. peculiar situation right now. Don't explain to each other. Actually, I was not able to understand your question. So what I would request is you try to stay back after, if you can, after the class, and hopefully it will get answered in the book. Unfortunately, I could not hear your question very well. So that's I think a problem with the sound situation, because I'm able to hear Sushant's voice very well. I was able to hear his voice, so there was no problem. There's no internet problem at my end. The problem, I think, is with the acoustics in that room and the fact that I'm not actually there physically. If I was in the room, I would be able to understand. So this is a thing we have to just try to deal with. I could not hear your voice, but maybe you can figure out for Neeraj how to ask your question in a way that is more audible. But anyway, we'll try to do that. Otherwise, just try to stay back after class. We'll try to address that issue. Otherwise, make a note of it, and we'll hold a special. I'll hold a special tutorial later on to address those questions. Okay. So we have a little bit of a problem because of the fact that I'm not there physically in the classroom. So we'll have to just try and manage that. Okay. Okay, right. Okay, so I understand there are 13 of you there. Okay, so please bear with me because I'm not there in the class. So we'll try to make the best of it. Okay, and try to just keep, unless you have a question, just try to keep the noise level down so that we don't have any disturbance in the class. Okay. All right. So what was I discussing? I was talking about the tax exclusive, right? Okay, mutually exclusive because obviously we know that this is true in this case, but it's not always true. Sometimes people might create taxonomy which is not mutually exclusive. Like for instance, if we create a taxonomy like this, if we say Germans, Japanese, barbers, and plumbers. Okay. So this one actually in India we pronounce it as plumbers. Actually, the right pronunciation is the B is silent. It's actually supposed to be plumbers. Okay, but in India, if you say this, people will say you're pronouncing it wrong. But actually, you should remember that this is actually plumbers. But anyway, so if we have this, now you see the problem here is again, ordinarily, I would ask a lot of people, what do you think is the problem here? The problem here is, of course, it's not mutually exclusive because some of these plumbers could be Japanese. Now, in that case, where do I put these guys? Some of these barbers could be Germans, and so on and so forth. So this is not a good taxonomy because it violates, okay, it violates many rules actually. But at least of the rules that we have studied so far, it violates principle 2, okay? It violates this principle, but actually it also violates the same level of abstraction, the principle 5, which we'll come to, okay? So you should not have this kind of this is a red flag. Whenever you see taxonomy like this, and surprisingly, in many cases in the world of business, in well-known textbooks, you will see these kind of problems, okay? You should immediately understand that this is not a good taxonomy, okay? So you cannot have this. So this is basically an example of how you violate the rule of principle 2, which is that the taxa should be mutually exclusive. Principle 3 is to minimize the high-level taxa categories, okay? Taxa or categories, minimize high-level taxa. What do I mean by this? I'll just take you back to my folder, the drive view, okay? 1 minute. All right, so if you see here, now these are the high-level categories in my, if I go back and I fold this, okay? Now these are the high-level categories in my folder, okay? Now again, this is not optimal because stuff like, you know, my publishing, which is important right now, then PhD is important. So I have taken it all out, okay? And law is also important because it's in law. So therefore, I have taken these out. Now ordinarily, these should be under the further high-level taxa. But just the idea here is to show you that there is a high-level classification, and then further you go into the trees. Then under DSB mix, one of the categories are academics. Under that, you have things like academic administration, and then you have a folder for each semester. Okay. Sometimes I might teach 2 courses in each one semester. You have similarly courses for that. Okay. So you have all these courses. Now I've shown you a further subdivision. Here you can see under summer 2020, there's IPM, which is investment portfolio management. Under IPM, there are several categories. All these categories you can see. Then there are further categories under the student folder. Then there's a further categorization here. So actually there are, I think, 6 levels of, it's 6 levels in this taxonomy that you can see up to here. So obviously the high levels are what you saw earlier, the high level, and this is the lowest level. And for whatever you've seen so far, this is the lowest level. Okay. So what I'm saying here is, in a way, to make it the taxonomy better, the high-level taxa should be minimized. So the high-level category should be minimized, and principle is related to principle 4. Okay, which is that because I'm putting this constraint on you, minimizing high-level taxa, then I need to give you some flexibility also, because as you can see here, very often you need many levels in the taxonomy to get a proper, because the material is very complex. Okay, so therefore you need many levels in the taxonomy. So what I'm doing is, while I'm putting a constraint saying high level taxa should be minimized, I'm therefore giving you flexibility saying you can have as many levels in the tree as you want. So you can keep going down and creating more levels in the tree. Here I'm jumping down one more level, one more level, one more level. It's like a tree branch structure. Okay, so you can learn to organize information in this way. It will be easier for you when you work with information, but otherwise you can't find stuff when you need it. Okay, and it's not the only way you need, only reason you need taxonomy. You may have to just figure out a much more structured problem. All right. Okay, so these two, principle 3 and 4, are related, which is you can. This is just a guide to doing a particular taxonomy. You minimize the number of high-level taxa and then freely add levels in the taxonomy, as many levels as you want. Okay, right. Now, principle 5 is the taxa at any level, same level of abstraction. What do we mean by that? It's a, like here's an example. Okay, you can see the problem. Here the problem is you got countries here, and then you got cities here. So you can't do this. Okay, because these are not the same level. Countries is a higher level of abstraction, because there are many cities within Germany. So whereas Tokyo is just one city, Sydney is just one city. So you can't have countries and cities in the same classification. You can't have districts and states in the same class. Remember, this is one level of the taxonomy. Okay, so we're talking about at any particular level, you can only have the same. You can only have the categories should be of the same level of abstraction. That's what I'm trying to say here. Okay? This is a very important principle also. Okay, so this is basically what I mean. Okay, so the given here, yeah.
So isn't principle 2 and principle 5 quite same by nature?
Yeah, you're not wrong. It is similar. Okay, but there could be a case where you're not violating principle 2, but you're violating principle 5. Okay. So for instance, if you take this, okay, now Tokyo is not, Tokyo and Sydney are not in any of these categories as such. Okay, they are not in any of these countries. Okay, so they're not really violating the principle of mutually exclusive, because if I had something like, if I had a taxonomy like Germany, and then in the cities I had Munich and Berlin in the cities, that would have violated principle 2, because then where do you put Munich and Berlin? They are actually inside Germany. So where do you put them? So in this case, it's not really violating principle 2. It is really violating this. So you're right in the sense that I think it's a good question, because you have detected that there could be situations where you violate both 2 and 5 together. Okay, so I will come to, hopefully we'll come to that kind of an example. You're right about that, absolutely right about that. That can happen, but in this case it's not happening, because these two cities are not in any of these countries. So this is only a violation of principle 5. Okay, that's does that are you satisfied, Sushant?
Yes, sir, got it.
Okay. So, all right. Okay. So, this is where we are talking about principle 5, which is we are the same level of abstraction. You will detect it very easily, actually, when you see this. Once you're training, once your mind is alert to these kinds of mistakes, okay, that's basically what I'm trying to do here, because you will see them very often in the real world. and in the textbooks also. So your mind should be alert to these kinds of principles, and then you can apply them and criticize the taxonomy. Okay. Another common mistake you will see in many finance textbooks, you will find, which are actually being used in MBA programs around the world. They will have a classification like all the financial markets are classified into stocks, bonds, options, and futures. Okay. So this actually violates many rules. Okay. Principle, because I'll show that. But mainly this violates, the P2 and P5, okay, and also P1. P1 is basically comprehensiveness. It violates that because comprehensiveness, because if you do this, you guys are not familiar with, because you have not studied finance like this so far. But I'm just telling you that the biggest market in the world is actually spot currencies. So spot is a type of instrument like options, futures, forward, swaps, and currencies are a major asset class. So all your currencies, so like dollar rupee, spot dollar rupee, that falls into this market. So you guys are familiar with this. When you go abroad, you need to buy currency, you look at the dollar rupee rate. That rate is being determined in this box, intersection of spot instruments versus currency asset class. Okay. So what happens is when you see this kind of a classification, it violates principle 1 because it's not comprehensive. It fails to include spot currencies because it only talks about stocks and bonds. Then options and futures, these are actually instruments. Mainly it's a violation of P5. I wanted to give that as an example, because options and futures are actually instruments and stocks and bonds are asset classes. Okay. So this is, you will not understand maybe the technical point about this criticism at this point because you have not been taught finance in this detail. But I think you'll get some flavor of what I'm trying to say, that it's basically like that barbers and countries, people, the example that I gave you, that Germans, Japanese, barbers and plumbers. Okay. Then you're kind of mixing up occupations with nationalities. So similarly here, you're mixing up instruments with asset classes. Okay, so that's not the right way to do it. And then you're also violating several other rules. P1, which is comprehensiveness. P2 is mutually exclusive requirement, which is that because some of the options are on stocks. Okay, so you can see here, stocks is equities. Okay, so your first, if you do IPM, the first project you will do is actually the second project you will do is actually equity options project, equity options trading. So that's an intersection of options and equities. So if you're saying options are separate, then there's a problem of mutually exclusive violating that rule, because you can have equity options. Okay, so FB is Facebook, so you can have, as an example, Facebook options. So there would be a problem. So these are all examples of violations of the rules of taxonomy, which I wanted to share with you because I think this is a very important topic. You should actually be, whenever you encounter any situation, you should practice this on your own. Okay, if you see a body of material, or even if you're studying something, like you're studying HR, or those of you who have decided, let's say that HR is an important subject, or something that you want to specialize in marketing, you should actually do, I told you to become subject matter experts. So you can actually do a taxonomy of your subject, which is a full survey of everything that is there in the subject, all the types of things you should know. And of course, you may not study everything. You should be aware of the full, range of topics in that subject, and you should arrange them in a nice way. So this is a good exercise because it trains your brain to think along these principles, okay, along these lines. So it's a good exercise to follow for any subject you're interested in. First, do a taxonomy. Any subject that you are studying, you must first do a taxonomy and then proceed. That will give you a very good roadmap. Okay, so that's as far as that topic is concerned. We'll now move on to this topic, which is, so I've tried to use Roman numerals here, just to make, so here what I'm trying to do here is that I'm just trying to keep track of the topics we are discussing. Okay, so first one we discussed is jurisprudence, second is taxonomy. I'll try to do that as much as possible so that you don't have to take notes, and later on when you're revising also, it becomes easy for you. So you're just checking for yourself that, okay, we discussed this topic, do I understand it in the way it was discussed? Okay, and some of the things are not very precise. You have to understand, just get a sense of it, and that's okay actually, that it's not 100% precise. And so you will use this as a roadmap kind of. But what I would recommend is, do not memorize the stuff. Okay, do not memorize the stuff. I think if you really want to learn and you also want to train yourself in the way you think and the way you communicate, if you want to prepare yourself for your eventual interview stage, okay, what I would recommend, the best way to study is to, you attend the class, be attentive. Okay, guys, is there a question in the room? Any question? Okay, all right. Okay, so what I'm suggesting is that you study attend the class, listen carefully, ask questions, okay, and then later on you make your own notes. That will be the best way to study because it will really help you to internalize forever. Once you make your own notes, you listen to you watch the video, or you can extract the audio from the video, whatever you want to do, and then you listen to it and make your. This is what many of your seniors have done, who are the better students, and this is very good for you because this will internalize all the concepts forever. You'll never forget it. So you must learn in this way because if this way, it will actually train you to be the kind of person that the corporates are looking for. They're not looking for people who are going to just mug up stuff and vomit it out in the exam paper, because that's a different kind of thinking. So they're looking for people who can think for themselves and who can express it in their own language. Okay, you work on your English communication also, and at the same time you train yourself to study in this manner. You will remember everything. It will not take much effort, and you will just you will be better prepared as a business student. You'll be evolving as a much more impressive business student, because all this has an impact on your brain and the way you think and communicate. All right. Okay. So the next topic. Now we are coming into the more core law topics. Okay, okay, so this topic is organs of the state and separation of powers. This doctrine. This originates from Baron Montesquieu, the French writer. All right. So here we have organs of the state, which we normally refer to. I've given you some hyperlinks here. All right. You can read that. But anyway, this is basically the organs of the state that we refer to normally are these three: the legislature, executive, and judiciary. Okay. Yeah, I've got a lot here actually. This is because I put in. I should make this. This is actually interfering with. I want to just indent it a little bit so that it doesn't. Yeah, so that you have a clean view of the three categories, which is legislature, executive, and judiciary. Okay, so when you refer to these terms or you use these terms, please either say the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary, or you can also say, three branches of government: legislative branch, executive branch, and judicial branch. Okay, so when you're using the word branch, the first two don't change. It's still legislative and this is legislature actually. In the first case, either you say the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. Okay, or you say the legislative branch, okay, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. Don't say. Sometimes I've heard people say judiciary branch. That's not correct. Okay, you have to say judicial branch. Similarly, these two change, but the executive word remains the same, whichever way you use it. All right. So these are the three branches. So these are broadly what they do, as you can see. All right. So the other tip I'll give you is, which I mentioned in the other class as well, that when you make presentations, please get used to this. That remember this. That, like you can see here, there's a lot of material, and I'm not going to read out everything to you because you can see the stuff on the screen. Okay, so when you're making presentations, even if there's a lot of material on your PPT, which you should actually try to minimize, don't make the mistake of reading out whatever's on the PPT. We see this mistake in our students all the time. Get out of that habit. Remember that they can see what you're presenting. Okay, so here you just highlight certain points and just talk about a few key aspects. Don't read out whatever's there on the screen. Okay, so this is the presentation tactic. Okay, so here you can see these guys make the laws. Okay, these guys execute the laws, or we say enforce the laws. All right, and then you have the judiciary, which interprets the laws. Okay, and settles all these disputes, etc. Okay, so we say they pronounce judgments in cases, and what is the rights and liabilities of the litigants. The litigants are persons who are actually fighting the case. Okay, so the rights and liabilities. So if some people A is suing B in a case, like in this case, as you can see, recently we had this announcement about the MJ Akbar defamation case, came out a couple of days ago from the Supreme Court. So where the Supreme Court said that the defamation charge will not stick because this lady has a right to complain, okay, and that should not basically lead to a liability on defamation, etc. So therefore, that's of course related to the actual facts of that case. So this is basically what the judiciary does. All right. Now, a couple of other points that we should discuss here, which is this important point here. What I've tried to do is evolve this material. Normally, if you look at a political science textbook, they will discuss only these three branches of government, and they will not discuss. There is actually a sort of a further nuance on with respect to the executive branch, which relates to the two types of people in the executive branch. Okay. Now, there are two types of people here, which is, if you think about it, now, first, let's give you some examples of the legislature executive. Now, in India, we have peculiar, let me give the example with respect to the US also. In the US, the legislature is the Congress. The US has a very strict separation of powers because they have a separate election for the head of the executive branch, which is the president. And they have separate elections to the legislature. So you have the Congress, which consists of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Okay, so you have the legislature, which is the Congress. And then you have the executive branch, which is the presidency, okay, headed by the president. And so you have a separate election for president, and you have a separate election for these two. So you have a separate House Speaker and Senate Majority Leader, and then you have a separate president. So this is how it is in the US. It's very clear separation of powers. But in India, it's not like that. And the same is true of the UK and many other countries like that, which have followed that model. So in India, what happens is you have Mr. Modi, who is, when he's in parliament, he's a part of the legislature. Okay, he's there as in his capacity as a member of parliament. So he's functioning as a part of the legislature, making laws. But when he sits in the prime minister's office, he is now part of the executive branch. Okay, so he's the de facto, we say de facto head, which means the guy who's actually running the show. So you might have many cases where you have somebody who is a figurehead, who is officially the head, but the actual show is being run by somebody else. Okay, so that person who's actually running the show we call the de facto head, and de jure is by law. Okay, that is the official kind of figure. Okay? So in this case in India, what happens is the de jure head of the executive branch is the president of India. Okay, but he is required to act under the advice of the prime minister and the cabinet of ministers. So therefore, the de facto head of the executive branch, we say, is actually the prime minister. Okay, so when Mr. Modi is in the prime minister's office, he's a part of the executive branch, and when he's in parliament, he's a part of the legislature. And the same is true of, say, Nirmala Sitharaman when she's acting as finance minister and issuing the budget and all this. She's part of the cabinet, and she's functioning as part of the executive branch, but she also sits in parliament, and then he's part of the legislature. So, yes, Kirit, you have a question?
No, sir, it got balanced.
Okay, no problem. Okay. All right, okay. So here we have, so what did I say? Yeah, so now we have, and the judiciary's role is pretty clear. Now, so there are two types of people in the executive branch. Okay, you should be clear about this. So in a normal all science textbook, you will not find a discussion of this type of the detailed discussion that I'm entering into right now of the two types of people in the executive branch, because historically that has not required. There was no requirement to discuss that actually. But now recently, because of events that happened in the Trump election, I think it's important to be aware of that, because this can happen in India as well. The problem that Trump was facing can actually happen to any Indian prime minister also theoretically. Because the executive branch has two types of people. That has the elected politicians. So Mr. Modi, if he loses the election, he will have to leave the executive branch, okay, because he will no longer be prime minister. But and along with all the members of his cabinet, they will all have to resign and leave. Okay, So there's a part of the executive branch which is the elected politicians that they will go around, they will move around in circles. So if they lose the election, they will move out of the executive branch. But there's also the unelected bureaucracy, which is all your IAS officers, etc., and other government employees who are basically, they don't change. Okay, so the IAS officers don't change. Now, you might have, they might shuffle some of the secretaries, but they don't really leave there. They don't lose their jobs in the sense that the politicians effectively lose their jobs. So the unelected bureaucracy does not lose their job. Okay, so one of the things that could happen, actually what happened in the US in the case of Trump, is because many of the government employees were actually leaning towards the Democrat Party, because the Democrat Party tends to favor a larger government, a bigger government approach. They want to have a bigger government. And whereas Trump was very clearly focused on, it was part of his platform that he would, try to cut down the size of the federal government. And for many other reasons, they were opposed to it. So what was actually happening in the Trump administration is that there were many members of the bureaucracy with it, which actually technically report to him, but they were actually trying to undermine his work. Okay, so there are many examples of this, and these people became known as the deep state. Okay, so they were referred to as the unelected fourth branch of government. Actually, they are not the fourth branch; they are a part of the executive branch. So, but this is the term that was used to refer to them. So the reason I'm discussing this is because this actually happened. Okay, so you should be aware of it. And this technically can happen even in India. It has not happened so far because the problem is not that big so far in India, but theoretically it can happen because it is a fact that these guys don't leave. These guys don't leave, so they can actually create problems in the implementation of policy, because the policy implementation goes through the bureaucrats, and there's a famous English series called, I don't know if you've seen it, there's an English comedy called Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister. So I'll mention those here, okay, which is Yes Minister, and I think it's BBC, I don't know if it's BBC, okay. English series, this is also quite humorous actually. Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister, okay, which is, I'm just going to write PM. Okay, which is basically telling the same story which I'm telling you now. So it's obviously a problem in the UK as well, where basically that they're showing is that the minister comes in and has a lot of ideas, and I want to do this and I want to do that, and then the bureaucrat says, okay, we'll show you what you can do, and effectively they find all kinds of ways to ensure that the minister doesn't get to do what he wants to do, because they don't want any change to the old system. So this is a problem actually, but it became particularly acute in the Trump administration. So this term emerged, deep state, so you should be aware of this term, and it's referring to this problem. And then you should be aware it can happen in India also. No reason why it can't. Theoretically, it's possible. Okay. So that is the discussion of the branches of government. I'll just come out with one more, just on this topic actually. It's a very important topic in law, because constitutional law, these things become very important. Okay, there are many cases in constitutional law which deal with the separation of powers and things like that. So now, the point I wanted to discuss about, there's a topic called, political philosophy. So it might sound like a very high-flying topic which we're not interested in, but I think everybody should think about this, because this fundamentally relates to this question of what is the proper role of government. And you'll see that many of the policy discussions, okay, which we had in the last class also, in the end of the last class. But what you see in the real world as well going on, many of the policy debates that happen, like even your farmers' agitation today, is fundamentally it can be retraced to the question of, there is a disagreement about the proper role of government, okay? Is it the role of the government to provide a living for everybody? Or is it the role of the government to just create a set of rules, and then people can figure out things for themselves, they can take care of themselves? So these are all questions on which people don't agree. And most of the policies, you will notice, it's important to have this clarity. Most of the policies are relating to the proper role of, disagreements about the proper role of government. Okay, so at this political philosophy, these are all being played out in front of you right now, with things like the farmers' protest and all the other kind of philosophical questions questions that come to our political realm as well. Okay, so here, this on the question of this proper role of government. Obviously, if you want to give the government a huge role, you want to give them a very important role, then what will happen is you'll have to also give them a lot of power. Okay. Now, the idea behind the separation of powers is whatever power you give to the government, the idea behind the separation of powers is that you can actually, before I come to that, let me just talk about the zero-sum game. This is also a term that you should be familiar with. That when you give a lot of power to the government, okay, you are most of the time reducing this idea of individual liberty. Okay, the more power the government has, so you can see political philosophy in the context of this question of what is the proper role of government, and if the government is going to have a big role, then the government should have a wide set of powers. But there is actually a zero-sum game that is going on, which is and there is a conflict between individual liberty and government power. Okay, you can see this playing out in the COVID lockdowns, where in India we've not had too many protests or anything like that, but you can see that in the US you've had a lot of problems. Now you're having problems in the Netherlands as well. There are problems in Australia as well, where many people are actually protesting about the lockdowns. They're not happy because they're not able to run their businesses. So they're protesting. There are riots almost in the Netherlands. So it's a lot of problems. So here you see a very good example, COVID lockdowns, between individual liberty and government power. Should the government have the power in the name of a pandemic to shut down your businesses, okay, and ask you to go into a lockdown? And then therefore because the government, if it does that, then individual liberty is going down. Many of those people in the US, in the Netherlands, etc., they are self-employed people. They can't earn their living. So there is a direct impact on individual liberty if you give more government power to the government. Okay, and this is actually what we call a zero-sum game. A zero-sum game means whatever I win, if you and I are playing a game, then it's a term that comes from game theory. If you get 10 rupees, then I lose 10 rupees. If I can take away 4 rupees from your 10 rupees, then I have now 4 rupees and you have 6 rupees. So it's a zero-sum game. Whatever I have, you lose. So this is actually so the terms that you're learning are important. Okay, political philosophy as a subject. Don't think this is some kind of abstract thing that is you don't have to worry about. Okay, this is a very real thing which is hitting you in the face every day, whether you realize it or not. Okay. All these questions are fundamental questions which are playing out. Yes, Shashank?
So when we are talking about zero-sum game, are we not taking a very extreme end? Like there's always a centristic approach, that is liberty to some extent and power to some extent.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I wouldn't say that you're, I think that definitely you have a point there that it may not always be true. Okay, but let me put it this way. So I think your criticism is valid. Okay, the conflict between individual liberty and usually there is okay, let's put it this way. Usually, in deference to Shashank, I think his point is correct that I should not have made a sweeping statement like that. Always it's going to be a conflict. So this will also teach you something else in your English communication. Okay, guys, please watch this. The point that Sushant has made is a valid criticism because I have written it in such a way, I did not realize it when I was writing it, that it has been written as if it is always true. Okay, that there is more power government, that means less power for the individual. It need not always be true. Okay, so his point is very valid. Now, how do I get out of this problem which he has created for me? So what I do is, I write. Now you should learn this trick. Okay, how do you write? Because you may have to write some stuff. Okay, so when you're writing stuff in an organization, please be careful about how you're writing. And always understand that if your statement is not going to be true at all times, you put in a hedge like this. So now Sushant cannot attack me successfully. Okay, I'm using attack in a fun sense, because now I can actually deflect Sushant's attack by when he says it's not true that there is always a zero-sum game. So what will I say to Sushant now? I'll say, well, look at my statement. I said there's usually a conflict between individual liberty and government power, which means that it is not always necessary for this conflict to exist, but usually it exists. So now I have an escape from Sushant's line of attack. Okay, you understand what is going on here? So, because very good point actually, Sushant. Valid criticism. So and you have also learned how I have deflected his criticism, how I have now rewritten my stuff to be able to deflect this kind of criticism. But it's a valid point. Okay. So, but here you can see the example I was giving, Shashank, was you're right about that as a general problem. So, but one example where you see there is a zero-sum game, which is government power to, during the COVID lockdowns, emergency powers of government to shut down businesses. That has a direct impact on many small business owners who are not able to operate. You see that, Shashank, as an example?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, but your point is absolutely valid, that it is not necessary that this will always happen. So it's a very interesting thing that is going on today, that in fact very interesting dynamics actually. If you follow the US is actually a very interesting country to follow because it's so big and powerful. I think it's useful for everybody to keep an eye on what's going on in the US because it does have an impact all around the world. So you see what's happening in the US, in New York right now. The New York Legislature has just, I think they have finally voted, or maybe one house of the legislature has voted, to strip the governor of New York, which the governor of New York is the executive branch. So the executive branch head normally has some emergency powers because they need to act quickly. So the New York Legislature has just voted actually, or at least a part of it, the Senate has voted, to strip the governor of his executive powers under the emergency powers, okay? Not all his executive powers, emergency powers, which he used during the pandemic because he made a lot of bad decisions. So this is a very interesting dynamic that is going on. There's abuse of government power that leads to a curtailment of individual liberties and lots of losses actually, lots of senseless loss of life, okay? And this you can see playing out real life in the Netherlands, in Australia, in the US, conflict, these COVID lockdowns, and how much can the government do in the name of a public service requirement. Okay, in India you don't see so many protests because we are a much more docile society. So normally what the government says we accept it. So we don't see all these lockdowns, but the Westerners are not so docile. So there you have a problem. Okay, so this is an idea that I wanted to, this is a very important thing to think about actually. Central questions: what is the proper role of government, which is basically a lot of political philosophy is concerned with this question, and these have real important implications for policy, which you are facing in the real world also, in daily life. You see it in front of you, and this idea of the trade-off between the individual liberty and government power. Okay, so usually there is a zero-sum game. So therefore, one of the things when the ideas behind the people who thought about political philosophy, like this Baron Montesquieu, his idea was that, okay, given that the fact that the government is going to have some power, okay, so let's try to limit the ability of the government to act in a tyrannical fashion. Okay, tyrannical, you understand that a tyrant is someone who basically harms his own subjects because he basically, by using force, he does things which are harmful for his subjects. So you can think of Hitler as a tyrant, etc. So these are all people who are acting in a tyrannical fashion. So he said what Baron Montesquieu said, and been echoed by many US jurists as well, that the separation of powers is one way to reduce the risk of government tyranny. That fine, the government has some... I'm just going into mute because there's some background noise, okay? So yeah, so the idea behind the separation of powers is that it is essential to prevent government tyranny, so that given the government will have some power, but let's split up the powers of the government into the three branches of government, so that no one branch has all the power. And therefore, there will be less chance of the government doing a bad thing to its own people, okay, and taking away the liberties of the people. So that is the idea behind separation of powers. One important idea behind the separation of powers. So you see all the connections, that this is a well-known doctrine in political science, the separation of powers. But you've learned a new element of that doctrine, which is that the executive branch has two types of people, and these guys who don't leave, they can create problems for the incoming politicians, because if they don't like these guys, they can create some serious problems, okay, which you saw in the first hand, you saw in the Trump administration. His agenda was actually slowed down by the members of his own team of the executive branch who were working against him. Very difficult to manage, actually, but this is how it was. So, and then you've learned about these ideas, why we do separation of powers, to prevent government tyranny. Now, where's the question of government tyranny coming from? It's coming from the idea that in many situations, there is a conflict between individual liberty and government power, as you can see in the COVID lockdowns and the business shutdowns. And this can actually end up in a tyrannical situation where the government behaves like a tyrant. So we reduce the power of the government by having separation of powers. You don't concentrate all the powers in one person. Okay, so this is the idea. So this you can see we have already discussed. Here I should write TV. Yes, Soumya?
So when we talk about separation of powers, it's essentially the three lists. So we have center state, but then we also have a union list. So
Yeah.
why can't we decide on one particular kind of governance mode? Because then going for a union list, then all of these things create a whole lot of loopholes, which then reduces the effectiveness of governance essentially. So why we just decide on a particular method of governance and then just go with it? Because this is the reason why miscreants appear in a society, or a whole lot of loss happens to governance. So why is this thing essential?
Okay, so what she's talking about, when you're talking about why, so what you're saying is why have union and state lists? Why not have only union list? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that we can, simply have a separation between center and state. Why have union? Because then it will lead to creation of more loopholes, and governments at state level or at center level will find ways to pitch in their interests and thereby reduce the overall goal of betterment of citizens.
Okay, so what Soumya is talking, I think what you really mean, let me, if I rephrase your question correctly, what you're saying is why union, state, and concurrent list, mainly this is your problem. Your issue is really with the concurrent list, and what you're saying is that why not have only union list and state list? Is that what you're saying? Is that a correct?
Yes.
Okay. Why not only union and state lists? Okay. Why not only a union and state lists? Okay, so this, just to make sure that everybody else understands what Soumya is talking about, is these lists are actually lists enumerate. These are in our constitution. Okay, these enumerate the domains of let's enumerate the domains in which state and union governments can exercise power, mainly through legislation. Okay, so for instance, education may be on the state list, okay, and so on and so forth, whereas defense will be on the central list. And what Soumya is saying is why have also a concurrent list? A concurrent list is basically a list which is common, both the center and the state can legislate on that. Okay, but there are very clear rules in the sense that in India, because we are we are tending to concentrate more power in the center, unlike the US. So India and Canada are very similar in this sense, that central government is very powerful, states are not so powerful. But in the US, it's actually the opposite, that the central government is supposed to have very little power, and most of the power is with the states. So in any case, all of these countries have this idea of the concurrent list. Okay, actually in the US, this concurrent list doesn't exist. There is a clear only union and state list. Okay, as far as the Constitution is concerned. Okay, they have only enumerated the powers of the union, the federal government, the central government in the US, and whatever is not enumerated goes to the state in the US. The opposite is true in Canada and India, where if something is not enumerated, it goes to the center. Okay, the power goes to the center. What Soumya is asking is, so these are just to make sure that everybody understands her question, okay, that it relates to the domains in which state and state and central governments can exercise power, mainly through legislation. Okay, so what she's saying is why have a concurrent list? Because it creates room for confusion and conflict and all that. So I think this is just so as you can see in your for answer to your question, there is an example here in the US where there is a much clearer separation, and they don't even actually have a concurrent list. They have only a federal list, a union list, which is, so whatever the union can do is written on the union list. So if it is not there, then they should not be able to do it. Okay, although they have come up with some all kinds of fancy theories to try and expand the powers of the central government. but it's not there in the Constitution. Okay, this is all bad logic actually. But anyway, so it's not there on paper. So everything that is not written down belongs to the states in the US. So you already have the people who wrote the US Constitution, they are more in line with Soumya's way of thinking, that they have not kept a concurrent list. In India, we have kept a concurrent list because we felt that, okay, this is just a point of view. So Soumya, you're not wrong. And at the other side, on the other side, these people are not wrong also. There's also some logic to it that, okay, there are certain areas where maybe both might want to legislate, okay, because this, what might happen is there may be some subject which is on the concurrent list, let's say, okay, like let's say transportation or something like that, okay. I'm not sure what whether it's actually there or not. But there might be, the state government might feel that there needs to be a law on this topic, but the center may not have gotten around to acting on it. So in this case, because it's on the concurrent list, it allows the state also to act in this area. Okay, so there are certain advantages also. I don't think there's it's always a black, so it's a point of view, but your point of view is also correct, that it is also a valid point of view that why have all this confusion? Just make it clear so that you don't have any conflict, right? But the other side, if I wanted to argue on the other side against your view, I would say that, okay, there's an example here of where legislation may be necessary. The center may not have done anything about it. So the state government can step in. Okay. But of course, here we have clear-cut rules in India for everybody's understanding. Okay, so we have clear-cut lists, union, state, and concurrent lists. So this is for the state, this is for the union, and it's for the concurrent, which is common area where both can legislate. But if there is any conflict on any of these items, let's say transportation, okay, is on this list, let's assume. And then the state makes a law on the transportation sector, but the government already has a law. The government later on makes a law on this, and there's a conflict between the two laws. Okay, so we already have a doctrine, a constitutional law doctrine here. Okay, which is called the doctrine of in constitutional law in India. We have a doctrine called doctrine of repugnancy. Okay. We have a doctrine of repugnancy, so it's good to know this doctrine, because repugnancy is a good word. You can learn this word, okay? Repugnancy, okay? And that is basically that what it says is that state law shall be void. Void means it has no effect. Shall be void to the extent of its conflict with any union law. Okay, so I don't know. So, were you? Had you heard about this principle?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this idea is already there in our constitution, that there is a doctrine of repugnancy, which basically says that the state law shall be void to the extent of its conflict with any union law. So therefore, we have the concern that Soumya is raising. Is a valid concern, because still you have to kind of go to court, and there are some recent cases like on the Insolvency Act. There is a case called Innovative Industries, so I can talk to you about one case if you want to read it up. There is a case on the Insolvency Act, and Bankruptcy Code of where is this? Okay, there is a cases. So I'll give you this case. You can read it up. Okay, the case is called Innovative Industries versus ICICI. How many ICICI? I put ICICI. Okay, I kept on going. Okay, it's like that joke where that little girl is saying, "I know how to spell banana, but I don't know when to stop." So, so case is called Innovative Industries versus ICICI Bank. So here, what happened in this case was that insolvency, it appears, is a matter on the concurrent list. Okay, insolvency of companies, it relates to bankruptcy of companies. Like Kingfisher went bankrupt, then infrastructure leasing and financial services, they didn't really go bankrupt, but they had basically, they were rescued by SBI. Otherwise, they would have gone bankrupt. So then Satyam Computer and all these companies went bankrupt. So this relates to Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, which I will refer to as just IBC 16, okay, IBC 2016. So Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code is a central law, okay, on the concept of bankruptcy, on the topic of bankruptcy. And there is a state law called, I don't know what the state law was, Maharashtra actually. Maharashtra state had a law about also relating to the topic of bankruptcy, and ICICI Bank had moved proceedings against this company called Innovator, they're one of their clients, I guess, under the IBC. Okay, so these guys then said, no, there is a Maharashtra state law which says that you can't do this, although the central law said that you can do it. Okay, so this was actually, they lost this case. They lost this. So eventually, this went to the Supreme Court, and they lost this. ICICI Bank won because the Supreme Court said that this is an example. So IBC is a bankruptcy. It is a union law. It's a central law. So if there is any conflict between the IBC allows ICICI Bank to do this, to take this step. So if there is a state law which is in conflict with that, that state law shall be void to the extent of its conflict with the union law. Okay, so basically here what we're saying, the union is the boss. You can disagree with the boss, but eventually the boss's view will prevail. That's basically what it is. Okay, because in India, countries like India and Canada are more centrist. They put more power in the central government. Okay, so we call them Quasi-Federal Constitutions, whereas the federal constitution is the US Constitution, which is very decentralized. Okay, highly decentralized country, our constitution on paper at least. But unfortunately, over the years, the central government, even in the US, has become fatter and fatter, and lots of power has been concentrated in the second central government, which was not given to them in the constitution. So it has happened because people were not watchful. So these things can happen. Okay. So does that give you some? Does that answer your question to some extent, Soumya?
Yes, so actually the point is that I understand that for all practical purposes you need concurrent list in your constitution, but it's just that it reduces your effectiveness to such a large extent, then why have one? That's just the point.
Yeah, the point actually here you can see once again how all policy debates. So in a way, she's asking, what she's talking about is not so much the proper role of government, but what is the proper distribution of powers between central and state governments. Okay, in a large country. In a country like Singapore, you don't have to worry about all this because it's such a small country. No center and state, there's only one city. Okay, so but in a large country, this is an important question that she's talking about a subset of this actually. So we can take this question and split it up further and say, how do we distribute the roles of government between center and states? Okay, so once we decide what is the proper role, then how do we divide this into the roles of the center and state government? And she's saying, she's arguing for a more central kind of constitution like India and Canada, as opposed to, and even in India, she's saying there should not be a concurrent list. So it's actually a valid point of view. So in a sense, this is a normative question. So you go back to the beginning of our class, what we discussed. This is a normative question. Oh, we have not yet come to the question of normative versus positive. Okay, so that's fine, no problem. But there is a topic which we are going to discuss later, which is the next topic actually, which is normative versus positive. But the broad answer to Soumya's question, I would say, is that this is a point of view. This is a policy view that you have. Okay, and so there is no way to say that you're wrong. And those who are opposed to you and who argue for this kind of system, and you can't say they are wrong either, because these are all subjective policy views. This is what you'll discover when we discuss normative versus positive. What you are expecting is a normative preference for one type of distribution of powers. Okay, it's a normative preference. So normative preferences cannot be settled finally. Okay, so I might say that it is immoral to drink alcohol. Now, somebody might not agree with me. Now, there is no way to say that I am wrong and the other guy is right. So it is just, these are just points of view, and in a way, they're kind of both right in their own way. And so you're saying, what you're saying is also right, and the other view would also be right. It's a matter of what is your preference. This is what you will find, that many of your debates in life are actually, they have no end, because they are based on fundamental subjective differences about what is the right way to do things. Okay, so this is what you'll find. Does that make sense, Soumya? That there will be no end to this debate actually.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So the next topic we have is this idea of normative versus positive. Okay, which is so we are trying to go through the topics one by one. I'm just trying to introduce you to certain important ideas. Okay, so you already got a flavor of this difference between normative versus positive. If you see here, So I've linked to this. This is this link actually. Yeah, this is the link. Right. So this link here, the difference between positive and normative, we just want to know these terms, is that a positive statement is about a statement about what is, okay? And so when we make a positive statement, then we don't actually, we are not expressing any kind of a policy performance preference. Like if I say that the Canadian Constitution is like the Indian Constitution is quite centralized in the sense the balance of power is tilting towards the center. Now here I'm not saying anything like what Soumya was saying, that this is the right thing, this is what she would say, but I'm not saying that, I'm just describing how it is. So it's a descriptive statement, okay? For a positive statement is only describing, okay, a certain state of matters, a certain state of affairs prevails, okay? So that's a statement which about what is. Now this statement can be wrong. So if I say that Roger Federer is less than 6 feet tall, that's a positive statement because it describes something. Okay, I'm describing his height, but it's actually wrong because he is more than 6 feet tall. That's okay. It is still a positive statement because I'm describing what is. Okay, it doesn't have to be right. Then, as he has explained it here. Okay. Now, as far as normative is concerned, these are subjective judgments about what is desirable or undesirable. Like Soumya had just made a normative statement that a split of powers into 3 lists is not desirable. Now, this is a classic normative statement because she said that this Indian style distribution into 3 lists is not desirable. Okay, so this is better, this is not desirable. Now, this is a subjective statement, this is a normative statement. Okay, so what ought to be? So she's saying it ought to be this way. Now, that's a normative statement. So this is a distinction that we have to be aware of between positive and normative. Okay, so you can read these notes. Okay, it will become quite clear. So normative is always about what ought to be, and you will find that most of the policy situations, most of the policy debates are about normative questions. So they don't have any real end to it. The discussion doesn't have any end because it is based on fundamental differences which cannot be reconciled. Philosophical differences about, again, going back to the role of government. Okay, so if you see these people who are arguing about the farm bill, it's a fundamentally normative discussion. Okay, so yeah, you can always criticize the policy and say this is not correct, and there is no end to that debate. Okay, so I'm just giving you a little heads up here. Please read this. Every MBA student must be very clear about economics. It's a very good resource, non-mathematical, and this is one of those things where I give you a tip. Now you got to take the ball and run with it. We will not have time to cover this in detail with you. It is your responsibility, even if you're going to be an HR specialist, it is your responsibility to understand this basic economics very well. And if you have a doubt, you can come to Sharindra sir, you can come to me, ask questions. Okay, so please make sure you take care of this problem. Okay, this is how we are going to study in postgraduate mode, where I can't cover everything with you. I will give you a tip and you work on it on your own. Okay, then this is it. So normative versus positive, there are a couple of other links. You can watch these things. Okay, so there's our topic. There's Okay, so this is my way of ensuring that we do not detain you beyond the appointed time. Okay, so the students in the class have already gotten up. I think they're quite tired after the first day of campus classes. Okay, all right. So yeah, so you guys, so class is dismissed, guys. You can leave, and those who have questions can stay back if you have any questions. So at this point, I will just I'll just pause the recording for.
Sushant this side.
Yeah, tell me.
Sir, where do we need to send you the groups for our presentations?
Okay, you just keep your groups ready. I will give you a spreadsheet because the presentations will take some time to start. Okay, you form your groups and be ready. Then I'll send you the spreadsheet a little bit later. Okay, I just
okay, sir, sure.
Going on starting your groups, and if you formed a group, be ready with that, and then you don't have to send it. I'll circulate a spreadsheet where you can enter your data. Okay.
Okay, sir.
We have a little time because we have to go through the first couple of modules. All right. Okay. So is anybody else has any question?